Question 42. For the single breath of radioactively labeled air, gas exchange in the bird occurs mainly during stage. So gas exchange occurs in the lungs, the trachea and the main bronchus and the sacs are not where gas exchange mainly occurs. It mainly occurs in the lungs. So if we look at figure 1b, we can see that the lungs are that structure between the posterior and anterior sacs. So we just need to match that up with figure 3 to find a stage where the radioactively labeled air is in the lungs, and that is clearly in stage B. So therefore, for 42, B is the correct answer. Question 43. Unlike the human respiratory system, in the respiratory system of the bird, A, the lungs are not vascularized. Well, that's not true. The lungs are quite well vascularized in order to allow for gas exchange to the blood. So the lungs are quite well vascularized. It is the sacs that are poorly vascularized, as according to that last line in the first paragraph of the stem. So B, the diaphragm operates only during exhalation. Well, there is no diaphragm in the bird, and the bird only has sacs. So we can rule out B, therefore. C, air gets into the blood by mechanisms not involving diffusion. So, well, this isn't really discussed, but in humans at least, diffusion is how the blood receives its oxygen and also offloads its carbon dioxide. So we can sort of rule out C because nothing was mentioned in the stem about to suggest otherwise. 43, D, air does not trace the same path during inhalation and exhalation. Well, that's the correct answer. If you look at figure 3, the air does not really trace its own path during inhalation and exhalation. So for question 43, D is the correct answer. Question 44. Which of the following human structures is most similar in function to the bird sacs? So the diaphragm is most similar in function to the bird sacs because the diaphragm creates air pressure variations that allow air to move in and out of the lungs via contraction and relaxation of the diaphragm. And the bird sacs pretty much serve the same purpose. They allow for movement in and out of the bird's lungs and do so via creating variations in the air pressure due to contraction/relaxation. So the correct answer for 44 is B. Question 45, air is exhaled from the bird during. So this is a pretty easy question as far as ACER questions go. You just basically need to look at figure 3 and realize that exhalation is pretty much a synonym for expiration in this context at least. So basically stages B and D are going to be the areas where you have exhalation from the bird. So therefore C is the correct answer for 45. But potentially the one way that you could make an error on this is if you only pick the stage D because you see that the radioactive air is leaving only in D, but that doesn't mean that air isn't leaving in B, it's just not radioactively labeled. Question 46. A large bird and a human, both breathing at a constant rate of 10 inhalations per minute, each begin to inhale radioactively labeled air. Assuming that the durations of inhalation and exhalation are equal, compare with when it first begins to be exhaled from the bird, radioactively labeled air will first begin to exhale from the human. So one cycle of breathing, that is from the start of inhalation to the end of exhalation, goes for about 6 seconds. And that's because we have 10 inhalations per minute, so we inhale therefore every 6 seconds. So humans and birds are a little bit different. It only requires one cycle in a human for a batch of air, to both be inhaled and exhaled. So there is nowhere for that air to sort of linger in the human. It all goes in and all comes out in one batch. But for birds, that's not true. For birds, it takes 2 cycles for the air to actually leave the bird's body. And that's because at the end of cycle 1, upon expiration, but the radioactively labeled air has not left the bird's body. It's still trapped in those lungs. It's only at the end of cycle 2, at the end of expiration, in which the air actually leaves the bird's body. So there is a 1 cycle difference between a bird and a human, and therefore we can expect that compared from when it first begins to be exhaled in the bird, in a human, the air will be exhaled 6 seconds early because it's 1 cycle earlier. So therefore, C is the correct answer for question 46. Question 47. Members of which one of the following pairs have the least similar function? So, A, the lungs and the sacs. Well, they definitely don't have a very similar function. The lungs in the human are responsible for gas exchange, whilst the sacs in a bird are responsible for movement of air. So the sacs would be probably more analogous to the diaphragm in the human. So A is the correct answer. But let's just go through the rest of them. So obviously lungs in the human and bird have a fairly similar function. The alveoli and parabronchi have very similar function. Parabronchi are responsible for gas exchange in the bird, whilst the alveoli also have a similar function in humans. Bronchioles can have gas exchange, so there are special types of bronchioles which allow for gas exchange, and they're called respiratory bronchioles, and therefore they have a similar function to the parabronchi. So for question 47, A is the correct answer. Question 48. According to the information provided, which one of the following is likely to be the most important reason that anterior and posterior sacs contract simultaneously and expand simultaneously? A, to help airflow in the correct directions. Well, that's definitely the right answer, because if they did not contract simultaneously, what would happen is air would not necessarily always flow in this counterclockwise direction that we've got going on in figure 3. What might happen is if the anterior sac, say, contracted out of sync with the posterior sac, well then air would actually, for a little bit at least, flow in a clockwise direction. So what you get, instead of only oxygenated air flowing into the lungs and deoxygenated air flowing out, potentially deoxygenated air would flow actually back into the lungs, which is not obviously what we want. And so therefore A is correct. So the reason that B is wrong, to maintain a high air pressure in the lungs, is because we actually want a variation in the air pressure in the lungs. We don't just want a high air pressure, and that's because we need to create that low pressure air pressure moment so that air will actually flow into the lungs upon inhalation. So B is incorrect, as we need a variation of air pressure for air movement into the lungs and out. So C is wrong because, well, as we can see from figure 3, we have more than one breath of air in the respiratory system at any point in time. And D is wrong, as there is no sort of info in the stem about the central nervous system generally involving synchrony. So A is the only correct answer for question 48.